Live from Tampa, Florida, the 2012 Republican National Convention with Brian and Brian, sponsored by the Media Research Center. 105.9 FM and AM 630. WMAL.
637 on WMAL. We're live in Tampa on Radio Row. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson. Late night here in Tampa with Chris Christie giving a speech and Romney giving a speech as well. And during the day, there are some protests from time to time.
Yeah, occasionally.
We ran into a few.
We see a lot of red lights, red flashing lights, and we see helicopters in the air.
A lot of helicopters.
You can tell something's going on.
Dan Joseph joins us now, video journalist for the Media Research Center. And you can check out his videos at mrctv.org. Good morning, Dan. How you been?
Hey, Brian and Brian, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
I know you went out the other day and you saw some protesters, took out your camera, and it was such a big hit that it popped up on Drudge. What did you find? Tell us about it.
Well, you know what? It was very interesting. We went out on Monday, and Monday obviously was the day that the convention was postponed for the most part. But we went out there in the rain in the pre-hurricane weather, and what we found a number of protesters, a couple hundred of them, about a mile away from the convention center. And these are primarily the Occupy Wall Street people. But one of the big ones was Code Pink, and I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with them. It is a group of women, and they've been around since around the time that the Iraq War was the primary issue. But since that's over now, they've become more of a women's rights group. And they've always been on the far fringes of the left. So what we did, we got there, and what we found was that many of these women had, in order to protest Republican stands on women's issues, they had decided to dress themselves up in homemade costumes that were meant to resemble the women's...
the southern region of the women's body.
Or if you want to use a term of art, we'll just call them the vajayjay.
That would be wonderful, Brian. Thank you for giving us that substitute phrase. Yes, now these were obviously... One of the things you have to remember about Code Pink is that Code Pink loves... They have hobbies, and one of their hobbies is making different things, arts and crafts. And they've always done this ever since. And sometimes they can be very original. These were quite elaborate. They were homemade costumes. They were... some of them were... bedazzled with sparkles and glitter. They had all sorts of intricate tubing, and they were relatively impressive for what they were. And these women are just going around in these costumes, and they're talking about how awful Republicans are.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So I was going up to these women. I'm asking them, now, when you are dressed like this, and you're trying to make this very important point, and you know you're being put on camera, you know you're being put in front of a nation that's basically having a very, very hard time deciding which one of these two candidates they want to vote for, what do you think the average person says to themselves when they see you dressed like this and doing this kind of thing? Do you actually think it helps your cause? Do you think that when people see a woman dressed up like a giant vajayjay, they say to themselves, hey, that woman probably really knows what she's talking about when it comes to politics? I don't know the answer to that.
Well...
But yeah, I was quite surprised, and again, yes, we did. We got on the Drudge Report, so it seems there are a lot of people who are at least intrigued to see what was going on at this protest.
Dan, most of the protests that we've seen have been rowdy but harmless. I mean, they show up, they hold their signs, they beat the drum, they chant for a while. Some of them are colorful, like the one that you just described. But there is an element out there that we've always been told about that has a more sinister side, the so-called anarchists. Have you seen any of them?
Surprisingly, not as many. We've been a little bit shocked because the protests here in Tampa, we expected them to be bigger, we expected them to be closer, but it seems as though the presence of the police force and the authorities has been so good, and they've had the entire convention center on lockdown, that the protesters are really having a hard time getting anywhere near the building. And similarly, as a result, you've seen pictures coming from places like Oakland, where Occupy Wall Street was, throwing Molotov cocktails and breaking windows and vandalizing buildings. And those were the anarchist elements of Occupy. We have not seen them here, and I think primarily it's because they know that the police forces are not going to take any of that, and there's going to be no possible way that they will be able to get away with anything at this convention.
We're talking with Dan Joseph, video journalist. You can check out his work at mrctv.org. So, as many strip clubs as there are around here in Tampa, and there seems to be one on every corner, I bet you never thought you would have to, or just go to a park and see a woman dressed as a JJ. You normally would have to go to, one of these clubs, Mons Venus.
Mons Venus, that's the one
of the clubs that
your
we
attention.
saw. I did notice that a lot of signs say they welcome the RNC. I did hear a story though that where the occupieds are located, the property is actually owned by some guy who owns a lot of the strip clubs, and the neighborhood nearby, which is middle class to a poor neighborhood, is very upset about the fact that they're there. But the rich strip club owner says it's my property and they're going to stay no matter what, and I don't care if it hurts you, even though they're protesting in favor of the 99%. They're hurting the 99% who live nearby.
Well, perhaps the strip club owner is a big supporter of the Occupy movement. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's just funny that he's a property owner and he's a rich guy, and he's allowing them to sit on this land where the nearby neighbors are saying, we don't want you here, and they're not a part of the 1%. They're actually part of the 99%. Hey, before we let you go, I have a great idea for you for your next video. Now, it may not be good for this particular convention. It may be better for you for the DNC. But you need to get up when we get up in the morning and go to work at 3 o'clock, and you're driving in to the green zone, to East Berlin, as I like to call it in here, inside the green zone, and see the people who are still up and still staggering around
at 3:15 in the morning
or Charlotte, and just put a microphone in their face and ask them how.
Hey, when we were in New York and we were in Zuccotti Park at the peak of Occupy, we actually did that, and there were people there who were spending the night in these parks, and they smelled bad, and there was, this wafting smell of some sort of illegal substance in the air. And you're going to find that, especially at the Democratic Convention, because what we find is that the liberal protesters tend to gravitate more to protesting liberal things these days. And we all, I've read about Chicago 1968, and there's some rumblings that same kind of thing can happen or has the potential to happen at the Democratic Convention this time. But yes, we are going to be out there all night. We're going to see what we can find, and we're going to make sure MRC TV brings America what's really going on down there, because we know that most of the liberal media will not. They are not interested in seeing that.
All right.
Dan Joseph, great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.